The glass in the courthouse window rattled as Josephine Taylor slammed the door to her father's chambers, her amber eyes glistening with tears of rage that she refused to let fall. Not today. Not when she had finally found the courage to stand up to him after 22 years of bending to his iron will. "I forbid it," Judge Hiram Taylor's voice thundered behind her, echoing through the polished halls of Hot Springs Courthouse. "No daughter of mine will marry a penniless cowpuncher with dirt under his fingernails, and nothing but empty promises to his name." It was June of 1883, and the Black Hills of South Dakota were abloom with promise, much like the love that had unexpectedly blossomed between Josephine and Ethan Caldwell, a cowboy who worked on the neighboring ranch. For 3 months, they had been meeting in secret, sharing whispered dreams beneath the vast Dakota sky. "Father, please," Josephine pleaded, turning to face the imposing figure of Judge Taylor. At 54, he was still a formidable man whose reputation for harsh sentencing had earned him the nickname the Hammer throughout the Dakota Territory. "Ethan is a good man. He works harder than anyone I know." "A ranch hand," Judge Taylor spat the words as if they were poison. "I did not educate you at Miss Porter's school in Connecticut for you to throw yourself away on some saddle tramp. You are to marry Edmund Pierce when he returns from law school in Boston next month. The arrangements have already been made." Josephine felt her heart constrict. Edmund Pierce was her father's protege, a cold, calculating young attorney who looked at her as if she were merely another acquisition to advance his career. "I will not marry Edmund," she said, her voice finding strength. "I love Ethan." "Love," Judge Taylor's laugh was cruel. "Love is a luxury for those who don't have legacies to build. The Taylors have been pillars of society since before this territory was even established. I won't have our name dragged through the dirt by your foolish infatuation." Josephine straightened her spine, feeling the stiffness of her corset beneath her lavender day dress. "My mind is made up, Father." Judge Taylor's face darkened to a dangerous shade of crimson. "You have until tomorrow morning to come to your senses. If you persist in this madness, you are no daughter of mine. Everything your name, your inheritance, your place in this family will be forfeit." His words cut deeper than any knife could, but Josephine had spent too many years being the perfect daughter, suppressing her own dreams to fulfill her father's expectations after her mother's death. She would not sacrifice her heart, not even for him. "Then I suppose I am no longer your daughter," she whispered, removing the cameo brooch that had been her mother's from her collar and placing it gently on his desk. The small act of defiance nearly broke her, but she turned and walked away before he could see her resolve crumble. Outside the courthouse, the summer air was thick with the scent of pine and the distant sulfur of Hot Springs' famous healing waters. Josephine pulled her shawl around her shoulders and hurried toward the edge of town, where Ethan had promised to meet her once she had spoken with her father. She found him waiting beside a weathered oak tree, his lean figure silhouetted against the setting sun. At 26, Ethan Caldwell was everything her father despised: a man who made his living by the strength of his back and the skill of his hands rather than through politics or law. His brown hair curled slightly at the collar of his faded blue shirt, and his green eyes lit up when he caught sight of her. "Joey," he said, using the nickname only he was allowed. He took one look at her face and opened his arms. She fell into his embrace, inhaling the scent of leather and prairie grass that seemed permanently infused in his skin. "He's disowned me," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. "Just as we feared." Ethan's arms tightened around her. "I'm sorry, Joey. I never wanted to come between you and your family." "You haven't," she said, pulling back to look into his face. "Father made his choice and I've made mine." Ethan brushed a strand of honey-brown hair from her face, his touch tender. "Are you certain?" "There's still time to go back, to make amends. I couldn't bear to think of you giving up everything for me." "Not everything," Josephine said firmly. "Just the things that don't matter, the things that would suffocate me in the end." "It won't be easy," Ethan warned. What I can offer you is simple hard work, a small home, days that begin before dawn and end long after dusk. And love, Josephine added. You offer me love. That's worth more than all my father's money and position. Ethan's smile was slow and sweet. Well, I did promise to speak with Reverend Daniels today. He's agreed to marry us tonight if you're still willing. Tonight, Josephine's heart fluttered. But I have nothing prepared. No wedding dress, no, you have me, Ethan said simply, and I have my mother's ring. He pulled a small circle of gold from his pocket, adorned with a modest pearl. She left it to me before she passed, said to give it to the woman who captured my heart. Josephine's eyes filled with tears as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit as if it had been made for her. We can leave for my brother's ranch in Wyoming after the ceremony, Ethan continued. He's offered me a position as foreman. It's not much, but it's a start, a place where we can build something of our own. Your family, they won't mind taking in your disgraced bride. Ethan tipped her chin up with his finger. My family is all you need now, Joey, and they're going to love you almost as much as I do. As the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows across the dusty streets of Hot Springs, Josephine knew she was standing at the crossroads of her life. Behind her lay the security of her father's house, the respectability of the Taylor name, and a future mapped out to the smallest detail. Ahead lay uncertainty, hard work, and a love that had come to mean more to her than breathing. Yes, she said, her voice steady. Let's be married tonight. Ethan's kiss sealed their promise, and hand in hand, they walked toward the small white church at the edge of town, where a new life waited to begin. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, with only Reverend Daniels, his wife as witness, and the soft glow of candles illuminating the humble sanctuary. Josephine wore her best day dress, a confection of pale blue silk that had been a gift from her father on her last birthday. The irony wasn't lost on her, but she pushed the thought away, focusing instead on the man standing before her, his eyes filled with a love that made her feel wealthy beyond measure. I, Ethan James Caldwell, take thee, Josephine Elizabeth Taylor, to be my lawfully wedded wife. His voice was steady as he recited the vows, his calloused hand warm around hers. Josephine's own voice trembled slightly as she promised to love and honor him until death parted them, but there was no hesitation in her heart. When Reverend Daniels pronounced them man and wife, Ethan's kiss was tender, almost reverent. Mrs. Caldwell, he whispered against her lips, and the name felt right as if she'd been waiting all her life to claim it. Outside the church, reality awaited. They had only the clothes on their backs, the money Ethan had saved over 2 years of hard work, and the 2 horses tethered nearby Ethan's sturdy gelding, and a dappled mare he'd purchased for Josephine just days earlier, anticipating their flight. We should ride through the night, Ethan said as he helped her mount. Get as far as we can before dawn. Your father will be looking for us once he discovers you're gone. The thought sent a chill through Josephine. Judge Taylor was not a man who accepted defeat gracefully, and she knew his rage would be terrible when he learned of their elopement. Will we make it to Wyoming by tomorrow? Ethan shook his head. It's a 4-day ride at least. We'll need to be careful, avoid the main roads where we might be seen. He swung into his own saddle with the easy grace of a man who'd spent most of his life on horseback. Are you afraid, Joey? No, she said, and realized it was true. Not as long as we're together. They rode north and west under a canopy of stars, the rhythm of the horses hooves a comforting percussion in the quiet night. The terrain gradually changed from the pine-covered hills around Hot Springs to more open country, and Josephine marveled at the vastness of it all. She had lived her entire life in the confines of town, her movements circumscribed by her father's expectations and society's rules. This boundless landscape, with its infinite horizon and wild beauty, felt like freedom. They made camp in a small copse of trees just before dawn, both too exhausted to continue. Ethan built a small fire, carefully shielding it to prevent the smoke from being visible from a distance. Not exactly the wedding night I'd planned for you, he said apologetically, As he spread his bedroll on the ground and covered it with his coat to make it more comfortable for her, Josephine smiled, warming her hands over the modest flames. "I think it's perfect." And later, as they lay together beneath the stars, their bodies entwined in discovery and delight, Josephine knew she had made the right choice. Ethan's touch was reverent, his words of love whispered against her skin like prayers. This connection, this joining of souls, was worth any sacrifice. They were on the road again by mid-morning, making their way through increasingly rugged terrain. Ethan was a patient teacher, showing Josephine how to read the land, how to conserve her water, how to sit in the saddle for hours without growing too sore. She was a quick study, determined to prove that she wasn't just a pampered judge's daughter who would wilt at the first sign of hardship. On the second night, they risked stopping at a small trading post to replenish their supplies. The proprietor, a grizzled old man with kind eyes, didn't ask questions when they purchased flour, coffee, and dried beef, though his gaze lingered on Josephine's fine clothing, so out of place in the wilderness. "There was a man through here earlier today," he mentioned casually as he wrapped their purchases. "Looking for a young couple, Judge's daughter," he said, "kidnapped by a cowboy." He looked up, meeting Ethan's suddenly wary gaze. "Didn't pay him much mind myself. Folks got a right to their own business out here." "Much obliged," Ethan said quietly, laying an extra coin on the counter before ushering Josephine outside. "He sent men after us," Josephine whispered once they were alone. "I never thought he'd go this far." "Your father isn't a man who gives up easily, from what you've told me," Ethan said, his expression grim as he secured their supplies to the horses. "We'll have to be more careful, stay off the main trails." The next 2 days were a test of endurance as they pushed through rough country, avoiding settlements and keeping to the shadows. Josephine's body ached from hours in the saddle, and her fine clothes were gradually becoming stained and torn by the journey. Yet she never complained, drawing strength from Ethan's steady presence and the love that grew stronger with each shared hardship. On the 4th day, they crested a hill and Ethan reined in his horse, a smile spreading across his face. "There it is," he said, pointing to a valley below where a cluster of buildings nestled beside a winding creek. "Circle C Ranch, my brother's place." Josephine felt a flutter of nervousness. "Do they know about me, about us?" "James knows I was sweet on a judge's daughter," Ethan admitted. "Though I didn't tell him we were planning to elope. Thought it best to keep that quiet until it was done." "What if they don't approve? What if they think I'm just a burden you've brought to their doorstep?" Ethan reached across the space between them to take her hand. "My brother is a good man, Joey, and his wife, Clara, has the kindest heart of anyone I know. They'll welcome you because you're mine and I'm theirs." As they rode down into the valley, a tall man emerged from the largest building, shading his eyes against the setting sun. James Caldwell was older than Ethan by 6 years, with the same lean build but a more weathered face that spoke of long years working the land. "Well, I'll be damned," James called as they approached. "The prodigal brother returns." His smile faltered as he caught sight of Josephine, taking in her disheveled appearance and the exhaustion evident in her posture. "And he's not alone." Ethan dismounted and helped Josephine down, supporting her when her legs threatened to buckle after so many days in the saddle. "James, this is Josephine, my wife." James's eyebrows shot up, but before he could respond, a woman appeared in the doorway of the house, wiping her hands on an apron. Clara Caldwell was a sturdy, pleasant-faced woman with auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her eyes widened at the sight of the newcomers. "Wife," she echoed, coming forward. "When did this happen?" 4 days ago, Ethan said, his arm protectively around Josephine's waist. "It's a long story and one best told inside if you'll have us." James and Clara exchanged a look that contained an entire conversation, and then James stepped forward, extending his hand first to Ethan and then, more gently, to Josephine. "Welcome to Circle C," he said simply. "Any wife of my brother's is family here." Clara moved forward and took Josephine's hands in her own. "You look dead on your feet, poor thing," Come inside. We've just put supper on and there's plenty to go around. The interior of the ranch house was modest but comfortable, with sturdy furniture and cheerful curtains at the windows. Two children, a boy of about 7 and a girl of 5, peered curiously at the newcomers from behind a doorway until Clara shooed them forward to be introduced. "Matthew, Sarah, this is your Uncle Ethan and your new Aunt Josephine," she said, her tone making it clear that good manners were expected. "You're pretty," Sarah announced, looking up at Josephine with frank admiration. "Are you going to live here with us now, for a little while at least?" Ethan answered for her, exchanging a look with his brother. "If that's all right with your pa and ma." "Of course it is," Clara said firmly, directing them to the table where a hearty meal of venison stew, cornbread, and fresh vegetables waited. "Family is always welcome." Over supper, Ethan explained their situation: Josephine's father's opposition to their marriage, his threat to disown her, and their hasty elopement. He left out some details Josephine noticed, softening the story for the children's ears, but the adults at the table understood the gravity of what they had done. "Judge Taylor's not a man to cross," James said thoughtfully when Ethan had finished. "His reach is long, even out here in Wyoming territory." "I know," Ethan admitted. "That's why we came to you. I need work, a place to start building something for Joey and me, and we need a safe haven just until things cool down." James nodded slowly. "I meant what I said about you being family, both of you. The foreman position is yours if you want it. We've grown enough these past few years that I can't oversee everything myself anymore. And as for you, Josephine," Clara added warmly, "there's plenty of work for willing hands here. I could use help with the children and the house, especially now that we're expecting again." She placed a hand on her still flat stomach with a small smile. "I don't know much about ranch work," Josephine confessed, feeling suddenly inadequate. "I can read and write, play the piano, recite poetry in French, but I've never even cooked a meal." Clara laughed, a warm sound that held no mockery. "Well, reading and writing will certainly come in handy for keeping the ranch books. As for the rest, you'll learn, we all do." Later that night, in the small but clean room that Clara had prepared for them, Josephine sat on the edge of the bed, brushing out her long hair while Ethan leaned against the window frame, looking out at the star-filled sky. "Are you disappointed?" he asked suddenly, turning to face her. "This isn't the life you were raised for. No fine dresses, no servants, no society parties." Josephine set down her brush and went to him, slipping her arms around his waist and resting her head against his chest. "I'm not disappointed," she said softly. "I'm exactly where I want to be." "Even when you're elbow-deep in dishwater or learning to mend shirts," she smiled against his shirt. "Even then. Because I'll be with you, building something that's ours, not my father's or society's." Ethan tipped her face up to his. "I love you, Joey Taylor." "Caldwell," she corrected. "Josephine Caldwell, and I love you too." His kiss was a promise, a covenant between them that whatever came next, they would face it together. The first weeks at Circle C were a baptism by fire for Josephine. True to her word, Clara took her under her wing, teaching her the domestic arts that had never been part of her education at Miss Porter's school. Josephine learned to make biscuits and stew, to churn butter, to mend tears and work clothes, and to manage a household on far less than she'd ever imagined possible. Her hands, once soft and white, grew calloused and reddened. Her fashionable dresses were put away, replaced by practical skirts and blouses that Clara helped her sew. The sun darkened her fair skin despite the wide-brimmed hat she wore for protection, and her once elaborate hairstyles gave way to simple braids or buns that stayed neat through long days of work. Each night, she fell into bed beside Ethan, exhausted but oddly fulfilled. He was equally tired, spending his days learning the intricacies of managing the ranch under James's guidance. But they always found time to share the events of their day, to laugh over Josephine's latest cooking disaster, or to celebrate small victories. "You're different," Ethan observed one evening as they sat on the porch after supper, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Stronger, more sure of yourself. Josephine considered this. I think I'm becoming who I was always meant to be, she said finally. In my father's house, I was always someone's daughter, expected to be decorative and obedient. Here I'm needed, what I do matters. Ethan squeezed her hand. You were always strong, Joey, you just didn't know it yet. The idyll couldn't last forever. 6 weeks after their arrival at Circle C, James rode in from town with a grim expression and a newspaper clutched in his hand. Bad news, he said, handing the paper to Ethan. Judge Taylor's put out a reward for information leading to your whereabouts, $500. Ethan's face hardened as he read the notice, which described him as a seducer and kidnapper who had abducted the judge's innocent daughter against her will. Josephine, reading over his shoulder, felt sick at the lies her father was spreading. This is ridiculous, she said, her voice trembling with anger. I went willingly. We're legally married. He can't possibly think he can do whatever he wants, Ethan interrupted gently. He's a judge with money and influence, and $500 is a fortune to most folks around here. James nodded soberly. Won't be long before someone connects the new Mrs. Caldwell at Circle C with the missing Josephine Taylor. Then we'll have to leave, Ethan said, his jaw set in determination. Go farther west, maybe, California or Oregon. No, James said firmly. Running will only make you look guilty. You need to face this head-on. How? Josephine asked, fear making her voice small. My father won't listen to reason. He never has. We fight fire with fire, Clara said, joining the conversation. She had been listening from the doorway, her face troubled but resolute. We get our own newspaper notice telling the truth. Find allies. The judge isn't the only one with connections. And in the meantime, James added, we make it clear that Josephine is here of her own free will, that she's a respected member of this community, and that anyone coming to rescue her will be unwelcome. The next day, James rode to the nearest larger town, Casper, where he had friends at the local newspaper. He returned with promises that they would publish Josephine's own account of her marriage and voluntary departure from Hot Springs. Clara, meanwhile, invited neighboring ranchers and their wives for supper, introducing Josephine as Ethan's bride and making sure everyone understood the true circumstances of their marriage. The Taylor name carried weight even in Wyoming, however, and not everyone was easily convinced. Whispers followed Josephine when she ventured into town, and more than once, she caught hostile glances from women who believed her father's version of events. It was painful, but she held her head high, determined not to show weakness. Then, 3 months after their arrival at Circle C, as autumn painted the landscape in shades of gold and amber, a lone rider approached the ranch. Ethan was the first to spot him, a solitary figure silhouetted against the late afternoon sky. Trouble, he murmured to James as they paused in their work of mending a corral fence. Single rider coming in slow, doesn't look like any of our neighbors. James squinted against the sun. Could be innocent, traveler looking for directions or work. Could be, Ethan agreed, though his hand drifted to the revolver at his hip. Or it could be one of Judge Taylor's men. The rider drew closer, and Ethan felt his blood run cold. Even at a distance, there was something familiar about the man's bearing, the way he sat his horse with rigid precision. Get Joey inside, he said tersely to James. Now, James didn't argue, striding quickly toward the house where Josephine was helping Clara prepare supper. Ethan moved to the center of the yard, positioning himself between the approaching stranger and the path to the house. The rider pulled up 20 feet away, studying Ethan with cold, calculating eyes. Edmund Pierce hadn't changed much in the months since Ethan had last glimpsed him in Hot Springs, still immaculately dressed despite the dust of travel, his dark hair perfectly combed, his clean-shaven face a mask of superiority. Caldwell, Pierce acknowledged with a curt nod. I see you recognize me, Pierce, Ethan returned evenly. You're a long way from home. "I've come for Josephine." Pierce's voice was clipped precise, every word carefully measured. "Her father is most anxious for her return." "My wife isn't going anywhere she doesn't wish to go," Ethan said, emphasizing the word wife deliberately. "And she doesn't wish to see you." Pierce's lip curled in disdain. "Wife, that farce of a ceremony conducted by that country preacher hardly constitutes a legal marriage. Judge Taylor has already begun proceedings to have it annulled on grounds of coercion and Josephine's mental incapacity at the time." Anger flared in Ethan's chest, but he kept his voice level. "Josephine was perfectly sound of mind when she agreed to marry me, and she came of her own free will. Anyone who knows her would testify to that. But who really knows her here, Caldwell?" Pierce dismounted, tethering his horse to a nearby post with deliberate movements. "These rough frontiersmen and their wives, they've known her, what, 3 months? I've known Josephine since we were children. Her father has raised her since birth. Our testimony will carry far more weight than yours ever could." "You're not taking her," Ethan said, his hand still resting on his gun. Pierce smiled thinly. "I didn't come to take her by force. I came to speak with her, to remind her of the life she's left behind. The comforts, the privileges, the father who, despite his anger, still loves her and wants her home. That's a lie." Josephine's voice came from behind Ethan, clear and strong. She had emerged from the house despite James's attempts to keep her inside, and now she stood straight-backed and defiant, her eyes blazing. "My father disowned me. He said I was no daughter of his." Pierce's expression softened as he looked at her, though his eyes remained calculating. "Josephine, you look different." It wasn't a compliment. Josephine was acutely aware of her simple calico dress, her sun-browned skin, her hands roughened by work. She lifted her chin. "I am different, Edmund. I'm no longer the ornament my father tried to shape me into." "Your father spoke in anger," Pierce said, taking a step toward her. "You know how he is quick to rage, but it passes. He's ready to forgive you, to welcome you home with open arms." "On what conditions?" Josephine asked, though she already knew the answer. Pierce hesitated just long enough to confirm her suspicions. "He would expect you to end this unfortunate alliance, of course, and there would be a period of reflection, perhaps at your aunt's home in Boston, until the scandal dies down. And then," Josephine pressed. "What happens after my reflection, Edmund?" Pierce's smile was thin. "Then, naturally, we would proceed with our engagement as planned." Josephine laughed, the sound startling in the tense atmosphere. "Did you really come all this way believing I would agree to that? That I would abandon my husband to marry you instead?" "I came because I care about your welfare," Pierce insisted, though a flush of anger was beginning to creep up his neck. "Look at you, Josephine, living in this wilderness, dressed like a farmer's wife, your hands calloused like a servant's. This isn't the life you were meant for." "It's exactly the life I was meant for," Josephine countered. "A life where I'm valued for who I am, not who my father is. Where I work alongside people I love instead of being displayed like a prize horse at a county fair." By now, the entire household had gathered on the porch, James with his rifle cradled in his arms, Clara with the children behind her, and 2 ranch hands who had been drawn by the commotion. Pierce glanced around, seeming to realize for the first time that he was outnumbered and unwelcome. "I see persuasion is futile at the moment," he said, his voice cold. "But consider this, Josephine. Your father is prepared to use every resource at his disposal to bring you home. Legal proceedings, bounty hunters if necessary. The Caldwells can't protect you forever." "Is that a threat, Pierce?" Ethan stepped forward, his patience worn thin. "Merely a statement of fact," Pierce replied, moving back to his horse. "Judge Taylor is not a man who accepts defeat easily." "Neither am I." He swung into the saddle with practiced ease. "I'll be staying at the hotel in Casper for 3 days. Should you come to your senses, Josephine, you know where to find me." With that, he wheeled his horse around and rode away, leaving a cloud of dust and tension in his wake. That night, long after the household had gone to bed, Josephine and Ethan sat by the dying embers of the fire in their small room, speaking in hushed voices. "He won't give up," Josephine said, voicing the fear that had been building since Pierce's departure. "My father will keep sending men, keep trying legal maneuvers. He'll never accept that I've chosen my own path." Ethan's face was grave in the firelight. "We could still go west," he suggested. "California's a long way from the Dakota Territory. Your father's influence doesn't reach that far. And leave your family, the position you've worked so hard for." Josephine shook her head. "No, I won't have us running forever. There has to be another way." "What about your mother's family?" Ethan asked suddenly. "You've mentioned aunts, cousins. Would they stand with you against your father?" Josephine considered this. Her mother, Eleanor, had come from a respected Boston family, the Crawfords, who had never quite approved of her marriage to the ambitious young lawyer Hiram Taylor. After Eleanor's death from influenza when Josephine was 8, the Crawfords had maintained a distant but cordial relationship with their granddaughter, sending gifts at Christmas and for her birthday, occasionally inviting her to spend summers in Boston. "My grandmother might," she said slowly. "She never cared much for my father, thought he was too severe with me after Mother died. But she's elderly now, and Boston is so far away." "What about writing to her, explaining the situation? She might have influence we could use." The idea took root, and the next day Josephine sat at Clara's small writing desk and composed a long letter to her grandmother, Eleanor Crawford, detailing everything that had happened since she met Ethan, her father's opposition, their elopement, her new life at Circle C, and Pierce's ominous visit. She wrote honestly about her love for Ethan and her fear that her father would never cease his attempts to separate them. "I know I have forfeited any claim to the Taylor name or fortune," she concluded, "and I accept that. But I cannot forfeit my right to choose my own husband, to live the life that brings me happiness rather than the one that brings my father prestige. If you could find it in your heart to support us in this, even from a distance, it would mean more than I can express." The letter was sent, but it would be weeks before any reply could be expected. In the meantime, life at Circle C continued with an undercurrent of tension. Ethan and James increased security around the ranch, making sure someone was always on watch, particularly when Josephine ventured outside. The children were kept close to home, and no one rode out alone if it could be avoided. Despite these precautions, there was work to be done. Autumn was moving swiftly toward winter, and the ranch had to be prepared for the harsh Wyoming weather ahead. Cattle had to be moved to more sheltered pastures, supplies laid in, buildings repaired to withstand snow and wind. Josephine threw herself into these preparations with a will, determined not to be a burden. She learned to render tallow for candles, to preserve the last of the garden's vegetables, to card wool and start the long process of spinning it into yarn for winter clothing. The work was hard but satisfying, so different from the ornamental accomplishments she had been taught as a judge's daughter. "You've taken to ranch life better than I ever expected," Ethan said one evening as they worked together in the barn, he repairing harnesses while she sorted dried herbs for winter remedies. "I had a good teacher," she replied, smiling at him across the lantern-lit space. "Several, in fact. Still, not many women raised as you were would adapt so readily." Josephine tied a bundle of sage with a piece of twine before answering. "I think perhaps I was always meant for this life, just born into the wrong circumstances. I remember as a child, I was happiest when I could escape my governess and run wild in the hills around hot springs. My mother used to say I had the spirit of a wild pony. Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Josephine said softly. "I think she would have understood my choices, even if my father never will." 3 weeks after Pierce's visit, as the first light snow dusted the hills around Circle C, a messenger arrived from Casper with a letter bearing a Boston postmark. Josephine's hands trembled as she broke the seal, her heart pounding with hope and trepidation. The letter was written in her grandmother's elegant, spidery hand, each word precise despite the slight tremor of age that was evident in the lines. "My dearest Josephine," it began, "your letter has both distressed and heartened me, distressed to learn of your father's unyielding stance, but heartened to hear that you have found love and purpose in your new life. Your mother, my Eleanor, always feared that Hiram's rigid expectations would crush your spirit, and I am glad to see that fear was unfounded." The letter continued, expressing sympathy for Josephine's situation and indignation at Judge Taylor's tactics. Then came the part that made Josephine gasp aloud. "I have taken the liberty of consulting with my lawyers regarding your father's threats. It is their opinion and mine that as you are of legal age and were married by a licensed minister, your marriage is entirely valid. Your father may bluster and threaten, but his legal grounds for interference are shaky at best. To strengthen your position further, I have instructed my attorneys to transfer into your name a portion of the inheritance that would have come to you upon my death. It is not an enormous sum, but it should be sufficient to establish you and your husband independently, should you wish to purchase land of your own rather than remaining dependent on your brother-in-law's generosity." Tears blurred Josephine's vision as she read the closing paragraphs. "Know that you have a friend and ally in Boston, my dear. Your mother would be proud of the strength and conviction you have shown. As am I, your loving grandmother, Eleanor Crawford." "What is it?" Ethan asked, concern evident in his voice as he watched the emotions play across his wife's face. "Bad news." Wordlessly, Josephine handed him the letter, watching as his expression changed from worry to disbelief and finally to a cautious joy. "Your grandmother is giving us money." "Enough to buy our own land," Josephine nodded, still too overcome to speak. "This changes everything," Ethan said, drawing her into his arms. "With our own place, we wouldn't be dependent on James's goodwill. We could build something that's truly ours." "A home," Josephine whispered against his chest. "Our home." The letter was followed, 2 weeks later, by a bank draft and additional correspondence from Eleanor Crawford's attorneys, confirming that a sum of $5,000 had been placed in Josephine's name at a bank in Cheyenne. It was a fortune by frontier standards, enough to purchase a modest ranch and the necessary stock and equipment to get started. The news galvanized the household. James immediately began making inquiries about available properties in the area, while Clara helped Josephine plan for the practicalities of establishing their own home. Ethan, meanwhile, threw himself into learning everything he could about ranch management, determined to make the most of this unexpected opportunity. "There's a place about 20 miles west of here," James announced one evening over supper. "The Wilkins place. Old man Wilkins died last spring, and his sons have moved back east. They're looking to sell 300 acres, a decent house, some outbuildings. The land's good, with year-round water from Pine Creek running through it." Ethan looked to Josephine, a question in his eyes. She nodded, excitement building within her at the prospect of a place that would be truly theirs. "We'll ride out tomorrow to see it," Ethan decided. "If it looks promising, we'll make an offer." The Wilkins Ranch was everything James had described and more. The house was solidly built of local timber, with 4 rooms and a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides. The barn was large enough for several horses and storage, and the corrals, though in need of some repair, were well designed. Best of all was the setting, nestled in a valley with Pine Creek winding through it and the mountains rising majestically in the distance. "It's perfect," Josephine breathed as they stood on the porch, surveying what could soon be their domain. "I can already imagine a garden here and perhaps some fruit trees along that southern slope." Ethan smiled, watching her eyes light up with plans and possibilities. "Then let's make it ours." The negotiations were swift, the Wilkins sons being eager to settle their father's affairs and return to their lives in Chicago. By mid-December, the deed was signed and recorded, and the Ethan Caldwell Ranch, which Josephine insisted on calling Pine Creek Ranch, was officially established. Moving day came just after the new year of 1884, with James providing wagons and men to help transport their modest belongings to the new homestead. It was bittersweet, leaving the security of Circle C, the comfort of family close at hand. But the excitement of beginning their own venture outweighed the pangs of separation. "You'll visit often," Clara insisted as she embraced Josephine in farewell. "And we'll come to you. 20 miles is nothing in good weather." "You've taught me so much," Josephine said, tears threatening despite her resolve to be strong. "I don't know how I'll manage without you to ask for advice." Clara smiled, placing a hand on her rounded belly. She was 7 months along with her third child. "You'll manage beautifully. And when you don't know something, you'll figure it out. That's what we all do out here." The first weeks at Pine Creek Ranch were a whirlwind of activity. There was endless cleaning and organizing to be done in the house, repairs to be made to the outbuildings, and decisions to be made about livestock purchases. Ethan hired 2 experienced cowhands recommended by James Tom Sullivan, a taciturn Irishman in his 40s, and Miguel Reyes, a skilled horseman from Texas, to help establish the operation. Josephine, meanwhile, set up housekeeping with an enthusiasm that sometimes outstripped her practical knowledge. Her first attempts at cooking for the ranch hands were met with polite but strained smiles, though she improved rapidly with practice. She planted an ambitious kitchen garden as soon as the ground could be worked in early spring, and even convinced Ethan to order fruit tree saplings from a nursery in Denver. "We won't see fruit for years," he pointed out as they marked out spots for apple, pear, and cherry trees. "Then we'd best get them in the ground now," Josephine replied practically. "I plan to be here to harvest them, however long it takes." As spring gave way to summer, Pine Creek Ranch began to take on the character of a real home. Josephine added touches that reflected her Eastern upbringing: curtains at the windows, a collection of books on shelves Ethan built for her, a small piano purchased secondhand from a family moving back east, but she also embraced the practical necessities of frontier life, learning to shoot a rifle accurately, to identify and avoid poisonous plants, to treat minor injuries when a doctor wasn't available. The ranch prospered under Ethan's careful management. With his savings and part of Josephine's inheritance, they purchased a small herd of quality cattle and several good horses. The first calving season was successful, with minimal losses, and by summer's end, they were cautiously optimistic about their future prospects. "We did it," Ethan said one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. "We've made something real here, something that's ours." Josephine leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. "We have. Though I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for my father to reappear and try to destroy what we've built." "Your grandmother's lawyers were right. He has no legal grounds to interfere. And even if he tried, we have friends now, a community that would stand with us." It was true. Despite their unconventional beginnings, Josephine and Ethan had gradually been accepted by their neighbors. Josephine's intelligence and willingness to help others had won over initially skeptical ranchers' wives, while Ethan's hard work and fair dealings earned respect among the men. "I think perhaps we've won," Josephine said softly. "Not that my father would ever admit defeat, but maybe he's decided I'm not worth the effort anymore." "His loss," Ethan said, kissing the top of her head. "His very great loss." The following week brought news that seemed to confirm Josephine's hopeful assessment. Clara, who maintained correspondence with friends in Hot Springs, wrote to say that Judge Taylor had been appointed to a federal position in Washington, D.C., and had left the Dakota Territory, presumably for good. "It seems he's found a new arena for his ambitions," Josephine remarked as she read the letter to Ethan. "Perhaps that's why he's abandoned his pursuit of me, or perhaps he's finally accepted that you've made your choice," Ethan suggested. "Either way, it's good news for us." With the shadow of Judge Taylor's interference receding, Josephine felt a new sense of freedom. She threw herself into ranch life with redoubled energy, expanding her garden, experimenting with preserving techniques for the coming winter, and even beginning to work with Ethan on the ranch's financial records, which had always been her father's domain at home, but which she discovered she had quite a knack for managing. As autumn approached once more, bringing cooler temperatures and hints of gold to the aspen trees that dotted the hillsides, Josephine made a discovery that filled her with both joy and trepidation. She was expecting a child. "Are you certain?" Ethan asked when she told him, his face a mixture of delight and concern. "Have you seen Dr. Harrison in town?" "Not yet," Josephine admitted, "but I'm nearly 3 months late and I've been feeling unwell in the mornings. My mother had 5 children, I know the signs." Ethan gathered her in his arms, his heart pounding against hers. "A baby," he whispered, awe in his voice. "Our baby." "Are you pleased?" Josephine asked, suddenly uncertain. "We've only just gotten the ranch established and a child will change everything. Pleased." Ethan laughed, spinning her gently around. "Joey, I'm ecstatic. This is everything I've ever wanted, you, our home, and now a family to fill it." Dr. Harrison confirmed Josephine's self-diagnosis the following week, estimating that the baby would arrive in late February or early March. He was cautiously optimistic about the pregnancy, though he warned that Josephine would need to be careful through the harsh Wyoming winter. "First babies are often difficult," he advised, "especially for women who weren't raised to physical labor as you weren't. Take rest when you can, eat well, and don't overexert yourself." Josephine promised to follow his advice, though privately she worried about the added burden her condition would place on the ranch's operations. Winter was a demanding season under the best of circumstances, with livestock to be fed and monitored, frozen water sources to be managed, and the constant battle against cold and isolation. Ethan, however, was determined that she would have all the support she needed. He hired a local woman, Mrs. Tompkins, to help with household chores 3 days a week, and he reorganized the ranch work to ensure that either he or one of the hands was always within calling distance of the house. "You're fussing," Josephine protested one evening as he insisted on taking over the task of bringing in firewood. "I'm pregnant, not an invalid." "Humor me," Ethan said, his expression softer than she'd ever seen it. "I couldn't bear it if anything happened to you or the baby because I wasn't careful enough." The winter of 1884–1885 was one of the harshest in living memory. Snow fell early and often, piling up in drifts higher than a man's head in some places. The temperature plunged to dangerous lows, freezing Pine Creek solid and making even short journeys outside a risk of frostbite or worse. Josephine's pregnancy progressed steadily despite the challenging conditions. As her body changed, growing round with new life, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point, from the pampered but constrained daughter of Judge Taylor to the mistress of her own home, preparing to become a mother on the Wyoming frontier. "You ever regret it?" she asked Ethan one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. "Eloping with me, giving up the life you knew in Hot Springs?" "Never," he said without hesitation. "Not for a single moment, do you?" Josephine thought about the comforts she had left behind, the fine clothes, the social status, the ease of a life where physical labor was something other people did. Then she thought about the freedom she had found, the deep satisfaction of building something meaningful with her own hands, the love that filled every corner of their modest home. "No," she said truthfully. "I gained far more than I lost." Ethan's hand moved slightly as the baby kicked beneath it, and his face lit up with wonder. "We both did," he murmured. The baby, impatient to join the world, decided not to wait for spring. Labor began on a frigid February morning when the snow lay deep around Pine Creek Ranch and the nearest doctor was unreachable due to blocked roads. "It's too soon," Josephine gasped as the first contraction gripped her. Dr. Harrison said March. "Babies come when they're ready, not when doctors predict," Mrs. Tompkins said practically, already rolling up her sleeves and setting water to boil. "And I've helped bring more than 20 into the world, including all 6 of my own. You're in good hands, Mrs. Caldwell. Ethan, pale but determined, refused to leave Josephine's side despite Mrs. Tompkins's suggestions that men were better off elsewhere during birthing. I promised to be with her through everything, he said firmly. I'm staying. The labor was long and difficult as doctor. Harrison had warned it might be. Through hours of pain that tested the limits of her endurance, Josephine held onto Ethan's hand and the vision of the child they would soon hold. You can do this, Joey, Ethan murmured encouragement as she struggled through each contraction. You're the strongest woman I know. Just a little longer. Finally, as the winter sun was setting, casting long shadows across the snow-covered landscape, their son was born a sturdy boy with a shock of dark hair and lungs that announced his arrival with impressive volume. James, Josephine whispered as she held him for the first time, tears of joy and exhaustion mingling on her cheeks. James Hiram Caldwell. Ethan looked surprised at the middle name. Hiram, after your father, Josephine nodded slowly. Despite everything, he is still part of who I am, of where I came from, and perhaps someday he'll want to know his grandson. Ethan kissed her forehead gently. James Hiram Caldwell it is then, a fine name for a fine boy. News of young James's birth spread quickly through the scattered community. And as soon as the roads were passable, visitors began to arrive Clara and James with their children, neighbors bearing gifts of food and baby clothes, even Dr. Harrison who, though late for the delivery, pronounced both mother and child to be thriving. Spring arrived early that year, as if in celebration of the new life at Pine Creek Ranch. As the snow melted and the first green shoots appeared, Josephine often sat on the porch with James in her arms, telling him about the land that would someday be his, the creek where he would learn to fish, the mountains he would explore. You're going to have a different life than I did, she told him softly. Freer, wilder, closer to what truly matters. Ethan, coming up behind her, rested his hands on her shoulders. A good life, he agreed, the best we can give him. As James grew from newborn to infant, displaying a sunny temperament and his father's green eyes, the ranch prospered alongside him. The cattle herd increased, the garden flourished, and Ethan's careful management began to show results in the form of modest profits. They weren't rich by Eastern standards, but they had more than enough for comfort and security. In late summer, a letter arrived that Josephine had never expected to receive. The handwriting on the envelope was painfully familiar, the precise, authoritative script of Judge Hiram Taylor. Should I burn it? Ethan asked, offering the unopened letter with a wary expression. You don't owe him your attention after all this time. Josephine hesitated, then took the envelope. No, whatever he has to say, I want to hear it. The letter inside was brief and formal, yet between the lines, Josephine could sense a struggle that her proud father would never openly acknowledge. Josephine, I have been informed by mutual acquaintances that you have borne a son. While I cannot condone the circumstances of his birth or the choices that led to it, I find myself unwilling to allow my only grandchild to grow up a stranger to me. If you and your husband should ever find yourselves in Washington, my door would be open to you. I make no promises of reconciliation, but perhaps time has softened some of the harder edges of our parting. Judge Hiram Taylor, it's not exactly warm, Ethan observed after reading the letter over Josephine's shoulder. But it's more than I expected from him. It's a beginning, Josephine said, carefully folding the letter and putting it away. Maybe someday James will know his grandfather, and maybe my father will learn that there are more important things than position and propriety. Will you write back? Josephine considered this, looking out at the land they had tamed together, the home they had built with their own hands. Yes, she decided. I'll send him a picture of James, the rest, we'll see. That evening, as the three of them sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and purple, Josephine felt a sense of completion she had never imagined possible when she fled Hot Springs with nothing but the clothes on her back and Ethan's promise of love. "We did it," she said softly, echoing Ethan's words from months earlier. "We really did it." Ethan smiled, taking her hand in his. "Did what exactly?" "Everything," Josephine replied, looking from her husband to her son and back again. "Built a home, created a family. Found a place where we both belong. My family is all you need," Ethan had promised on that fateful day when she chose him over her father's wealth and position. Looking back now, Josephine knew it had been the truest promise ever made to her and the one most completely fulfilled. As young James dozed in her arms and Ethan's hand held hers, Josephine Taylor Caldwell watched the first stars appear in the darkening sky and gave silent thanks for the courage that had brought her here, to this moment, to this life that was hers not by birth or circumstance, but by choice and love. And in that choice, in that love, she had found a freedom and a belonging that no fortune or family name could ever have provided. It was, she reflected as the evening deepened around them, everything she had ever truly wanted and more than she had ever dared to dream.